Just trying to conserve my throat, please, so understand. I will be. I will be. I will be. I will be. I will be.
And stitching together a social safety net. And all of this led to unrivaled prosperity and the rise of a broad and deep middle class, in the sense that if you worked hard, you could climb the ladder of success. Now, not everyone was included in this prosperity. There was a lot more work to do. And so, in response to the stain of slavery and segregation and the reality of racial discrimination, the civil rights movement not only opened new doors for African Americans, but also opened up the floodgates of opportunity for women and Americans with disabilities and LGBT Americans, others to make their own claims to full and equal citizenship. And although discrimination remained a pernicious force in our society and continues to this day, and although there are controversies about how to best ensure genuine equality of opportunity, there's been at least rough agreement among the overwhelming majority of Americans that our country is strongest when everybody's treated fairly.
Hi, I'm David Williams. I'm currently 63 years old, and I started with Open Book on my extended project when I was 58 years old. I did that EPQ as it is equivalent to a portion of an A-level in order to gain access to an undergraduate degree in visual anthropology at Goldsmiths University, which I have recently graduated from. I hope this video helps you guys who are about to start your extended project have some sense of how to navigate the project and, in fact, what project to actually choose.
Right, do you need to do a sound check or anything like that?
No, it's all done.
Testing.
Some of us are professional.
And we want this to look sufficiently professional that we can actually, broadcast it to people. Go on. Kick off.
The EPQ.
Introduce the EPQ.
The EPQ is it's a piece of work, a 5,000 words essay, or it can be a piece of artwork, a video, which would be your main subject of the EPQ, and you would then write about that, about 1,500 to 2,000 words. We would help you in the EPQ class how to write an academic essay, how to do proper research, how to study skills towards how to write an academic essay. I think the beauty of the extended project is that you can choose your own subject. Maybe something that you've had a question you've wanted answering really. I think the beauty of that is that it's going to interest you, so you're not going to get bogged down halfway through the essay, because what you're researching is something you've been interested in for a while. Does that make sense, John?
Yeah.
What would you add to
Adding to that, it's very much, like you said, it's something you might have thought about previously, but you're thinking about it in new critical ways, and it's developing critical skills that are not only just important generally, but really going to be beneficial when you go further in your academic career as well. So it may be a topic about that you've discussed with people before, whether friends or family, or debated with people before, you know, about the kind of, I don't know, should the death penalty exist, things like that, should there be legalisation of drugs. But what you're then doing is you're taking that topic and going into the kind of academic research side of it and looking at it in a new way that may even change the way you feel about the issue. And I think that's one of the important things that academia can do for you, is that it can make you think about things critically and have new kind of insights that you may not have previously had.
Okay, so we've talked a bit about the research project side of it. Can you tell me a bit more about taking the creative option? How would you even start with writing a creative essay?
Cut. It can be more difficult doing a creative piece of writing because it's not so much about a fixed formula or methodology in the way that you would write a kind of traditional academic essay, but there are ways that you can produce work that's creative that does show how you've gone about kind of bringing together a series of influences and inspirations. And what you would then do is you'd kind of do a running kind of continuous commentary of everything that you pulled together to kind of come up with certain ideas and say, you know, this particular piece of writing was inspired by a short story I read by Kurt Vonnegut, or it was written as a response to a question that was posed in kind of speculative dystopian fiction, something like The Lottery by Shirley Jackson, something like that. So I think although it's very different, there is a way that's quite similar in that you are documenting everything that you are doing to bring together your kind of ideas and inspirations. And I think whether it's creative or whether it's the typically academic essay, one of the great things is that you document your entire journey, and that's as important to the kind of outcome of the project as the actual essay or the creative piece itself.
Yeah.
Christine, how did you get started in creative writing?
How did I get started? Well, I've always kept a journal. I've always kept diaries, and over the years, and writing poetry. I had a love of reading poetry, and one day I just attempted to write poetry, and ever since then I've written a poem, or maybe one a week, or sometimes two, and I didn't know that I didn't call them poems at the time. It was just writing. It's somebody else looked at my work and said, that's creative, and I thought, wow, I can do that. And then I just went away with it, and I wanted to do something with it, but I found that I was writing a lot about myself, and I thought that wouldn't be of interest to anybody. But then I started sharing my work and what I'd written along with my artwork, and they say they go together, but you can do something with that, and other people will want to hear that, because we don't live in solitary experiences. Other people out there may share an experience and benefit from the writing, and I found it very cathartic. And because of the condition that I have, I thought writing was like an aid. It became an aid, not a crutch, but an aid to, my recovery.
And tell us a bit about writing critical commentaries. What advice would you give to somebody?
In writing critical commentaries, I did find the process difficult because I hadn't done it before. So, but I got enough information. I went away with that information, but then I thought, I'm going to have to kind of critique my own work, and I found that very hard. And so I reread my work. I asked myself if I answered the question, because I'd formulated my own question. Have I answered the question? Have I raised any further questions? And I had to also think reflectively. I had to reflect and kind of about the learning process. What have I learned? And also not just what have I learned, and what about the process of learning? What have I gained, and what did I find difficult? What were the challenges, and how would I address those? And you know, and any other questions that were raised that you leave the kind of reader with, that is a bonus. Because you cannot always answer every question, or even your essay question. If it raises other questions, I felt that I was doing something right.
That's wonderful. Could you give us some examples? When you say you have to think about what you've learned, what kinds of things do you put into that section?
It may be about research and embracing other people's perspectives, even though you don't agree with them, introducing them and having counter arguments, and sometimes you shift, your opinion will shift, but you know, it's good to know what other people think and what other people are writing about, even about, it might be a personalised topic or question, but it's good to know the other arguments that are out there, and introducing them into your narrative as well. It can't just be about the self and I and my perspective. And also about if there are any other individuals, give them a voice, but also give yourself a voice in your writing.
Okay, cut for a second.
Yeah, I found that when I was writing things, the difference between sort of writing on a computer or on pen and paper, I found pen and paper much more, it seems to be something that you can express words directly using your body, and if you're writing words down, they seem to be lodged more precisely in your memory than when you're using technology such as laptops, from my experience anyway.
No, go on, Charlie.
I insist.
I'm probably not the best person to talk about this, to be honest. So it's, I think you've just got to be very dedicated. I think a key factor to self-motivation is the question you ask yourself: is this a really burning question, and is it important enough for me to keep going? Otherwise, you get halfway through the essay and the motivation will disappear.
I think there are kind of techniques as well, because I think we have to be honest and say that for anyone really, there'll be times when your motivation isn't quite as high as others, but there are ways of approaching that, and I always think of what they call like the irreducible minimum, where if you don't feel like you can achieve a lot at that particular point in time, at least just try something, even if it's quite small and seemingly insignificant to the wider project. Just the fact that you were still engaging with it and doing something will keep you going.
Use examples.
So, reading's obviously a very important part of the research side and ultimately for the writing. If you feel overwhelmed by a piece of writing, break it down. Just try and do a small part of it and at least kind of come away with the fact that you at least attempted something, and knowing that if your motivation isn't that great at that point, it will come back to where it is because you kept on at it and you kind of pushed through. Even just a small amount of note taking or a flow chart or a spider diagram, it might open up new ideas. It might not be the most painstaking and kind of long piece of work to do, but it could really open up other avenues and provide some of the inspiration that's lacking at that current point in time.
I think doing something, even if you've got a blank bit of paper, just as Charlie said, do a spidergram, just put your question in the middle of it. Because if you do nothing, that becomes self-perpetuating. And if you do nothing on one day, then the next day you think, oh, why bother? And it will just go on and on. So just doing something, writing something on a blank piece of paper.
Well, Nelson Mandela was asked the question, how did he actually occupy his time while he was in Robben Island? And he said that he traveled the world through literature. So, books can take you to places and experiences, that you'd never normally get.
And it can be really helpful just to sort of minimise the amount of work you think you're going to do. So you can say to yourself, I'm just going to do 5 minutes.
Yeah.
All I'm
Yeah.
going to do is write down the title of this chapter and the first 3 things it says, and then I'm going to stop. The chances are you won't stop. The chances are you'll get involved and you'll carry on and you'll work. But if you promise yourself that you're just going to do 5 minutes, it gets over that awful hurdle of thinking, I have to sit down and do this for 2 hours. I'd also say that focus is like a muscle. Now, I can't do chin-ups. This is probably obvious to all of you, although I've promised myself I'm going to learn. But if I practiced every single day, starting with just little baby stretches, I would eventually be able to do it. And focus is like that too. You can grow the capacity to focus. Start with little bits. Give yourself little rewards. Biscuits, a cup of tea. You know, I'm going to work for 10 minutes and then I'm going to have a coffee. Or I'm going to work for half an hour, then I'm going to put the radio on. Anything that entices you to get started is going to help, because once you start, then you're making progress. About like written communication, but also verbal communication. Go for it.
Right.
So part of the project is you have to make an oral presentation. That means
right,
you have
sorry,
to
yes.
stand up on your
Yeah,
legs
yeah.
and talk about your work.
Well, the presentation part of it is everybody I've known who's done it have been really, really nervous about it. But the thing I always say to the student is, you are the expert in this. You've written this essay. So the presentation is a presentation of your essay, how you came about it and what it's all about. It's about 10 to 15 minutes in front of your peers and maybe a few others. But as I said, you are the expert. You try not to be nervous, which is almost impossible. But the only time that there'll be questions at the end of it. But as I said, you've done the stuff, you know your stuff. Stand up and be professional and confident. And confidence is half the battle, I think.
This
Say,
is
Charlie?
definitely, but this is also another reason why we ask people to document things from day one, because I think sometimes there's a misunderstanding that the presentation is just going to be a justification of the arguments made in the essay, but the presentation really is about that journey again. So the individual might be saying, you know, initially I wanted to look at this subject, but then it kind of developed into this, or I changed my mind and I went down this route instead, and that stuff is really kind of important in the presentation, because we want to know what your experience was like. We don't necessarily want you to kind of just make an argument in favour of what you've written, and if you've got all that kind of material that's documented from day one, it's going to make it actually quite an interesting and enjoyable experience to construct a presentation, I think.
But I think an important
practice, though, you know, having a practice at doing the presentation. I mean, would it be worth, you know, rather than the going straight in and doing a presentation as it's supposed to be, if our students, you know, sort of did almost like a mini presentation every time they attended, to say what they'd been doing, that then could build up to their proper presentation at the end. Because I agree, I was terribly nervous when I did my presentation, and practicing it might have been useful, you know, getting feedback, just general feedback from peers before doing the official presentation.
Yeah, I do think it's a good idea to factor in some practice, however you do that, whether you do it in an informal way, but just with people who are around you, or whether you do it as part of a class. But I also think that this is almost more important than the written part of the project, because in your future life, you are going to need to stand up in front of people and talk about what you've done, what you've built, what you've learnt, what you've found out, what needs to be built, why something fell down. You need to have that capacity to talk clearly and rationally with reasons and logic and evidence to convince somebody that your idea is right. And that's going to happen to you probably more often than you're going to have to actually write reports and essays and so on. So as a transferable skill, this getting up on your feet and talking and answering questions and explaining what you've done is absolutely critical. Really, really valuable thing to do.
But also,
something else
you know,
that also generates is insight from other people, because you can get their opinions and ideas and insight into the project as well.
yeah, I was just going to say that, like, if you're doing a 5,000 word written piece, you write it as if your audience are experts in that field, Whereas when you do the presentation, to demonstrate you fully understood the thing you researched, you speak to people as if they really don't know, so you won't use jargon, etc. So there are two different presentations. One is to the expert and one is to the general public.
I think that's a really good point. Yeah.
Make it understood.
Yeah. And one of the great things about this as a qualification is that however well or badly it goes, you know, if your presentation crumbles, if you forget what you're trying to say, you haven't failed, you haven't torpedoed your results. You still get credit for the fact that you tried, and then you reflect on that process and say, in future I would have done it better by doing this, this and this. And you get extra points for that. And if you engage with your audience and they give you really insightful feedback, and you can then demonstrate that you've put that feedback into your essay, then you also get points for that as well. So you're not just kind of standing on your own legs with this. It can be a very collaborative thing, and you can get credit for the fact that you've engaged with other people's opinions.
Can I make a suggestion? So I was told by you, Sarah, to keep all of my scrappy notes to demonstrate the process of my thinking in the project. However, I think it would be useful if, and you just explained how important the actual presentation is, if you actually had to do intermediate presentations to show a development to the final one, because you get like one chance, and I'm really messed up because I just got so nervous, and
I'm going to have to stop you.
All right. Don't worry, I can edit to that.
No, that's okay. There's a reason why we don't do this.
All right.
And that's because the moderating board, the OCR, don't like you to do that. They don't want us to give you too much. But it's not quite as big as an A-level. It's about half the size of an A-level, and that's why you can do it in 3 to 4 months if you're not trying to do too many other things at once. And if you've got time on your hands, as some of you watching this might have, it's the next step before you start thinking about university. But it's also a really useful next step for thinking about moving into work, because the things that you'll learn are really valuable, what we call transferable skills. That means they're skills that work in any topic area, in any walk of life. And how to manage your time is one of the most important things that you'll need to think about in this project. Talk about time management.
Time management. It's one thing I'm not very good at, but it does teach you. You have to set yourself up a timetable, really, to look at where you can fit. If you've got a busy life, which most of you probably will have, you have to set up a timetable of your life, really. It sounds a bit bizarre, but then you have to squeeze in how much time you're going to have to study for this particular subject and fit it around what your normal daily schedule is, or your weekly schedule even.
And you have to prioritise.
I think time management is the single most important kind of attribute of studying. Whether it's an easy thing or not is a different matter, but I think time management is basically where everything else will fall into place for you. I mean, you can have all the resources, you can have a great writing ability, you can be a voracious reader, but unless you balance all of those things adequately, it's going to be quite difficult. So it's not just that it will help you in terms of writing this academic or creative piece, it will, as Sarah says, give you transferable skills for other areas in life.
And it will help you to build your capacity to understand the world of information. Social media and the internet is a blessing in some senses, but it's a curse because it means that you're constantly flooded with information. Sorry, cut for a minute, David.
The idea that I've been grappling with is to actually try to understand how I can get the different layers of the present, the past, and, if you like, a a trajectory into the future. In other words, stepping outside of time, using the magic of film to express my ideas of the essence of, or the spirit of the journey that I had been through, not just as a member of the Igbo royal family, but as a filmmaker. And
National Educational Television presents African Writers of Today. This program was recorded in the Nigerian National Museum, Lagos.
The beautiful thing about being with this company is that I had a dream of being a ballerina and an idea of what that meant. And he has given me a reality to it. He has changed me from being a dreaming little girl into a ballerina.
When you look at the research, you're finding that Black students, they actually have higher aspirations. So a higher proportion of Black students really want to go to college after high school.
Clearly they have the higher aspirations, but we've got structural reasons why they're not actually enrolling.
The barrier isn't that they're not capable or have the potential, it's just that they don't have the support.
We're wanting to develop a college-going culture.
I want to hear the students say, I love that school, I'm getting ready to apply to that school, I can't wait to attend that school, and I'm going to be a graduate of that school.
One time. One time. One time.